Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. I hope you're tuning in. Let me, there we go. The main idea of the show is to provide players with a forum to ask questions in advance about chess, or if you're tuning in live to the ICC channel, then on YouTube, you can participate in the chat that's on your right on the screen. I'm getting an advertisement. I suppose you guys have already watched that. And I'm turning that off. So this week, let me see. Now, the basic rules here are you need to be logged into YouTube to participate in the chat box, which is probably automatic for most of you. I'll generally give priorities to the questions that I've received beforehand during the week, which has the advantage that they've been more carefully prepared, they can be more precise, and they can give me with actual positions and moves. So I've gotten a couple of very good questions already over the last few days, and I'll use those. There are three good ways to ask questions in general in advance during the week. It's best to submit them a day before the show, but it's actually okay. I'll check in the morning also. The first and probably best way to do it is I have an email address, askimwatson@chessclub.com, that I'll get to right away. That's askimwatson, ASKIMWATSON, at chessclub.com. Chessclub.com, of course, is the ICC address. We also have a Twitter channel, hashtag AskIamWatson, same thing. Anytime you feel like it, you can send a tweet to AskIamWatson and ask a question for the show. Finally, you can send a message to my ICC handle, John L. Watson, JOHNLWATSON, which is another way to reach me. So the alternative is to ask a question live right now during the show, which I mentioned, and you can ask about anything. History, chess openings are asked about a lot. People are interested in them, and I've played and taught them and written about them for a long time. Chess strategy, leading players, events, books, videos, whatever. So, or anything that comes to mind. So let's get started. First, let me give you a question from the chat box at the end of the last show, the very last question, which I didn't get to, is what's a good chess psychology book? And I'm not really sure if there are any truly good ones, at least if you mean about a chess player's mental processes, as opposed to techniques of thinking about moves, which there's plenty of books about. Of the older books I grew up with, there are several classics. One of them is Fine Psychology of the Chess Player, which everyone read when I was young. It's a Freudian work. He was a very famous Freudian, actually, as well as, of course, a world-class chess player. And it's psychoanalytic analysis. A lot of it's about famous chess players and their proclivities. And most people, so it's more about chess players' minds than a practical treatise about the thinking process. And most people seem to think it's quite silly, and I think I agree with that. So I'm not recommending that book, but it's worth knowing about. It's sort of a classic. And by the way, there was a question last week about Fine and whether the World Championship would have been different if he had played it in 1948. So you can go back to that. Okay, now for more serious works, Krogius's old book called Psychology in Chess is the best of the older ones. It's quite readable, and I think you can even improve by reading it. It really talks about the practical issues involved in the psychology of chess. There's also The Chess Mind by Gerald Abrahams, or maybe it's Abrams. I think it's Abrahams. And that's a really smart and a fun book. And it's maybe not quite as practical as Krogius's, for example, in terms of direct advice, but it's got more positions. It's a little chattier. Bill Hartston also wrote a funny book on the subject, but I only read little bits of it. So now, in modern times, we have Practical Chess Psychology by Avni, which I think is quite well written. And I was trying to think about other books that include some psychology. One of them is Yarmolinsky's great book. Yarmolinsky's on ICC, of course, called The Road to Chess Improvement. It has some nice psychological insight. I think the one that really comes to mind is Rowson's psychological observations in his two books, especially the 7 Deadly Chess Sins, and there's some more in Chess for Zebras. Now, those two books are so good that I especially like the 7 Deadly Chess Sins that you will want to read them anyway, whether you want psychological insights or not. So, and then very recently, now I'm missing a bunch of books, skipping a bunch of books here, but we have Tukmakov's book, Risk and Bluff in Chess. This is very recent. And another book by an American author whose name I couldn't quite remember, I think Stewart, which is called The Will to Win. I think Chess Psychology, The Will to Win. But I haven't read either one of those last two books. So I'm sure that listeners can expand upon this list greatly. You can put some books in the chat list if you want to, because I'm definitely no expert on the subject, but I thought I'd throw out those books for starters. It's an interesting discussion. I wonder how many people have read books on chess psychology. So that would be interesting to see. Okay, now I got a bunch of questions on the French defense this week. So we'll go from opening questions to non-opening questions to back to opening questions. Here's one from my email, the email I mentioned to you. Regarding the Guimard and the Hecht-Reefschlaeger Frenches, quote, I'm an older player and do not want to memorize a great deal of theory. I wrote down all the notes to your series on the French, 21 lectures. That's in my ICC archives, by the way, if you want to check those out, lectures on the French, or French repertoire. And my two questions to you are, one, are these two systems good for an older player like myself at age 60? And that's an easy answer. Yeah, I think they're great for people who don't want to memorize a lot. In fact, let me show you what they are. They're not that well known, and that really helps. And there isn't a tremendous amount of theory. And they aren't horribly critical. There are some critical lines in the Guimard. This is the Guimard. I think we've already talked about this in an earlier show real briefly. That's called the Guimard French Tarrasch. And the other one he's mentioning that I talked about is the Hecht-Reefschlaeger. Very safe system, and I think pretty interesting. So yes, I think these would be great systems to play, as opposed to the big main lines which go on forever and ever and ever. So, well, might as well leave that up there. That's the Hecht-Reefschlaeger. The next part of the question is, were DVDs made of the Guimard and the Hecht-Reefschlaeger variations, and where could I purchase them? And the answer is, I don't know of any DVDs with either of these systems. There are a few videos that have been online quite a long time ago, and not really having anything more. I had a couple videos on Chess Lecture, actually, chesslecture.com, but I don't think they're any better than, I don't think they're that worth that much at this point. So my lectures would cover far more, for example, if you want to look at the ICC lectures. Now, the best material by far on both of these systems, the Guimard and the Hecht-Reefschlaeger, is on the chess publishing website, where Neil MacDonald and I have been discussing these lines in detail, in great detail, for many years. And that's the only place I know where you can find people who are really interested in the Guimard and the Hecht-Reefschlaeger. And we saved extensive notes in many, many annotated games on that site. In fact, by coincidence, I counted 64 annotated games with each of these systems, 64 with the Guimard and 64 with the Hecht-Reefschlaeger. And that includes a survey and maybe even a couple duplicates, so that might not be exact, but it's a ridiculously thorough coverage, especially of the Hecht-Reefschlaeger, which is extremely obscure and much better than anything out there in the rest of chess literature. Unfortunately, this is a paid subscription site, Chess Publishing, but you can keep your expenditure to a minimum by subscribing for only 1 year, for example. You can even subscribe to just part of the website, like the French defense, and then you can download the games, all of these games, and put them on your system, on ChessBase, for example, and you get all the annotations and all the games. So I imagine after a year you could quit again, and you've only although I think you'll love Chess Publishing so much, that site, that you'll probably stick with it. So, okay, so that's really the question about those systems. I played against Jim Andres. I'm looking at the chat box now. I see your bishop before bishop d2 knight c6. Yeah, that's quite reasonable. Oh, he was white. I'll show that in a second, then we'll get to the next question real quickly, but why not? It's great when people say things like this. So here we had a Winawer variation with bishop b4, bishop d2, which is not a particularly good move, I don't think. And this is just such a good reply that I don't think you need anything else, but there's nothing wrong with knight c6. It's certainly a playable move. It hits the d4 pawn. I can't believe there can be anything that bad with it. I suppose, well, white can always defend or pin the knight, but I think the critical move might be, well, two critical moves. One would be queen g4 because it hits the square, so that threat maybe doesn't mean much right away. And then, of course, you have gambits with knight f6 and rook g8. So I think that looks pretty good for black offhand. Okay, so that's just a thought. And the more critical line, it seems to me, would be to play here and gambit the pawn that way. I'm sorry, to play a3. And then if black wants to, if black doesn't take, you wonder what his bishop's doing out there. But if black does take and tries to win a pawn, then we start getting very interesting things going on here. Or even maybe, I haven't analyzed any of this, even maybe d5 because that hits the g7 square. So that would probably be a pretty good answer, I think. Be interesting. You can put down what the other moves might be there. Sumo just said, I played the knight ge2. Oh, he's white. Okay, so white played knight ge2, but I like the idea of a3. I think a3 is good because it makes knight c6 look a little funny. I mean, are you really going to let me defend the d4 pawn? Or are you going to retreat the bishop? And if you retreat the bishop, then white must be pretty happy with that. But he said he actually played knight e2 here, just defending the d pawn. And what can I say? I'd have to analyze it. Put a computer on it, think about it. Yeah, this might also be good for white. I'm not sure. It's just very hard to tell without analyzing it, what exactly is going on here. Very interesting position, though. Okay, thanks for that contribution. That was cool. Now, the next question comes from last week. Solomon Kennedy in the chat asked whether a tournament or a match system is better for the candidates qualifying cycle for the World Championships. I talked about who I thought might win or do well, and the nature of the candidates, who was in it, and that sort of thing. So the question was, that's a tournament, and he asked in the chat, well, what about matches? Which is better, a match system or a tournament? And I think that people are attached to matches by tradition, even though in my opinion they aren't as good as tournaments. I like tournaments better for several reasons, and one of them right off the bat is there's no arbitrary matchups. Since you have to play against all of your peers and all of your opponents instead of just 3 out of 7, assuming there's 8 players, that would be only 3 matches. And I think that's just really much fairer than matches because everyone has to play everyone, so one or more players doesn't get through by not having to play the best opponents who may have been eliminated by blitz playoffs or in these short matches especially, or maybe defeated in an Armageddon game or some such, or just had a bad match. So you really should have to, I mean, I think it's great if you have to play everybody. And then there are several other advantages, but I think a really major one is that tournaments are traditionally just more exciting. You see a much greater variety of play, variety of openings and structures. And finally, in modern times, a practical factor is it's so much easier to get sponsors for a tournament. And also get the time in players' schedules. They don't want to keep playing these matches a month apart or something. So for 7 separate candidate matches, which is what it would be, that's very difficult to organize. So sponsors are going to prefer a tournament. Now, people have different opinions about this. Traditionally, there have been candidates matches. They've had some wonderful matches and great play. All kinds of fun things have happened in matches, so you can disagree with this, but I just thought I'd tell you why I like it so much. I think tournaments are a good way to even to decide the world champion. If tournaments are going to be more, if world championships are going to be more and more often, it might be fun to throw in every other championship could be a tournament. I think that'd be great. The way that Topalov won, for example. I think that I love tournaments. I just think they're more exciting and easier to present to the public. Okay, now let me see, is there something else? Nothing in the chat channel, so I could just continue and go on. I think this show might be fun if it's mostly prepared questions, because that way people really get to think about what they want to ask. They get to tune in and hear an answer, or go to YouTube later. All this will be on YouTube later. And ask a sort of more thoughtful question and something they've been thinking about for a while. I used to get great questions in my to my messages on the ICC to the John L. Watson address after I did my lectures. all kinds of questions about what should you do here, what are some books, all that sort of thing. So it's the same thing. Here's a chance to ask me about specifics without having to just throw something onto the chat channel, although that's fun also. A nice thing about the chat channel for those who are listening is just replying to things that I've said and that other people are saying on the chat channel and talking, having a little conversation. I think that's kind of fun. So having said that, let's go back to, let me just check something here. I want to check the time for a second. All right, so let's go back to some questions that I got during the week or during the last few weeks. I tried to go back and look at old shows and see what we haven't handled yet, and old questions that were submitted that I just never got to. Here's one: how do you handle the King's Indian Averbach variation from the black side? Okay, here's a good question about a Guimard book, and I'm going to get to that because there's not much out there. Let me answer that first. John, can you tell me a good book to learn the Guimard? And I just talked about the Guimard. I hope you caught the first part of the show. We talked about the Guimard and the Hecht-Reefschlaeger and how the best material is on the Chess Publishing website. And there are almost no books on the Guimard. The main source that most people have is my book, Dangerous Weapons, French Dangerous Weapons, which has a chapter, fairly thorough chapter on it. And of course, it's a little out of date now. My Chess Publishing annotations have updated the book considerably. And also, of course, the other thing to do is look at databases, because right now especially, a lot of good players are playing the Guimard. In fact, my last Chess Publishing column for last month, I concentrated on recent games because there were so many good ones. So top players are playing the black side of the Guimard. As far as a book, there's my book, and I'm not trying to cheat any other French author from mention, but I don't know who's covered it. I mean, surveys of the French just give short things, and they're all pretty old too. So I would say that there isn't a book that I know of, and there may be one out there, but I don't know of it. Good question. Now this question is how to handle the King's Indian Averbach from the black side. So let's look at what the King's Indian Averbach is. It's probably a little underrated. It's a little out of fashion. It's always been considered a very respectable way to play. I know Dave Vigorito mentioned that he thought it was difficult to play against in his classic 2-volume work on the King's Indian, and he should know. You play this move first, but then instead of going into a classical line, this would be the famous orthodox classical line, you play this move bishop g5. And the reason you play bishop g5 first, I'll say this really quickly. I don't want to waste too much of the show, but if, for example, you played bishop g5 in this position, black would have this nice idea of playing here, chasing the bishop down, and then getting rid of it and winning the bishop pair. And it turns out that even with what seemed like weaknesses on the king's side, this is easy to black's position is easy to defend, and he'll have the two bishops. So that's what white's trying to avoid when he plays this move bishop e2. That's the reasoning behind playing bishop e2 first, because now if you start chasing it, you can't win it. So white keeps up his pressure, and all black has done now is weaken his king's side for no reason, because he didn't win the bishop pair because it's covered there. Okay, so that's kind of one of the first reasons for playing bishop e2. There are other reasons. Bishop e2 also supports the idea of h4, h5. So that's another interesting point to it. It also just gets a piece out. All right, so at this point, I was thinking of mentioning two different systems. I obviously can't go over them in detail because there's tons of theory, but the first one is this move. I think this is one of the easiest ones to play. It gets a piece out, and it intends to play this move e5. Now, if you play e5 right away, you're going to lose material because of this sequence here. And now white is attacking both this twice and that, which is going to also attack a rook. So that's a blunder for black. He doesn't want to do that. And instead of doing that, black prepares that move. And here's the difference. Let's say white did some nothing move here, and black played here, and white took and played here. Well, now it's a whole different story, because the only threat after knight d5, you're no longer threatening that square. The only threat is this, and that's easily defensible. And black's ahead in development now and is threatening this move. So that's, and also it can get rid of the knight at some point. Okay, so that's another reasoning there for black, is to play knight a6. I want to try and give you a little bit of the reasons behind these moves. So now white has two main ways to approach this, maybe a little bit more, but the old main line is to play here and here. And now it turns out if you try to win that pawn, just as in the main exchange variation of the King's Indian, you end up losing the e pawn, and it just isn't very strong. So most people play this move. And black now plays, there's different ways to play, but I used to like to play this move. And now, oddly enough, so the idea is to take here, maybe play bishop d7, get moves like b5, b4 in. The knight's going to come to c5 with tempo. And it turns out it's hard for white to react to this plan unless he plays this sort of clever move, which looks like a waste of time, which is playing there. The idea is to defend the e-pawn here, keeping your knight on a pretty nice square. And even though that wastes time with the bishop, it's actually well placed now for a queenside action. That's the idea. So at this point, black would defend against b4, chasing his knight away. So this is a big old main line, and I have to apologize because the line I was thinking about, sorry, this is the only problem with doing this, is that sometimes I get confused. The line I wanted to show you, that is a main line, by the way, but that's, you don't really play bishop d3 there. You put your knight back on d2, and that's considered fine for black. The line I was going to show you is a little different. It had to do with playing knight e2 at some point. So how would that go exactly? That would go with, oh, I think, okay, this is an oddball move, but I think this goes with the move queen d2, excuse me. There we go. Queen d2, here, here. And the idea, and then black plays this move, trying to break up the queen side. And now white has this way of playing here. Sorry about this, I got that wrong. In order to do what I just said, defend the e-pawn, but also move towards the queen side. And black protects against the move b4. And at some point, black's going to take that pawn on d5. Try to get the move b5 in. I'll go real quick through this. And then white tries to stop that because it's quite a good move, b5. But that creates a weakness here. And this position is really interesting in my opinion. I like this position for both sides. I played this in one game. I actually had this exact position, which puts pressure this way, and maybe thinks about playing queen b4 on that weak square. And white's fine in that position, but black is also. And then I also think you can think about playing that clever little move with the idea of rook b6 attacking here, and maybe rook b4 also attacking that way. So that's one system. I know that's superficial, but we can't go into too much detail here. That's one system you can play, is knight a6. Sorry about that knight f3 deviation. Knight f3 is not as dangerous. Let me show you that one more time and why that is. Knight f3 is not as dangerous as queen d2, because I think by attacking here immediately, the knight has to go to a somewhat passive square. And I think this is just fairly easy for black to play. Okay, so sorry about that. That's knight a6. And then I thought I'd show you a more traditional move, which is c5. And one of the reasonings behind c5 instead of playing for e5 is this general rule that I think I've mentioned before. When bishops go away from the queen side early, and that's true of black's bishops too, you can strike back in the center and try to get your queen out to a square like this or this. And that's what black does here. Because the queen side's a little undefended over there in general. And if you do have to play bishop d2, you're going to have to play it with a loss of tempo against a move like queen a5. So one of the popular lines here, okay, white always plays here. It's a little hard to describe why, except that this dark square is really a problem, especially after knight c6. And there are many ways for black to play this, but an interesting line, I think, a fairly straightforward line, is to play here, and then after this move, which is the main move, yeah, I didn't really show another move here, but I think that's a good one. Okay, let's do this first. Actually, there's two orders to do this. That's actually not a bad line, but maybe play this move first and then play here, because that forces him to e3 instead of f4, it turns out. It's a better move to play bishop e3. And now if white plays here, we'll transpose. But this does offer white one more chance, which is to try to win this pawn. And the only problem with that is that then black can come out here, threatening to take, which puts 3 pieces on that square. And even white's king could even get in trouble. So after queen a5, white doesn't really have time to take that pawn, is the idea. White has to do something about the center. And at that point, the main line, yeah, let me just show you that in a second. The main line, well, let me just show you what happens if d5 first, because that means we're going in order. D takes c5 is actually the most popular move, because d5, it's quite easy for black to play, to get counterplay, is the idea. For example, if white makes his standard move attacking here, black takes here first, and then black simply defends that pawn, and then he has moves like rook e8. And just for example, one way for this to go that's a popular line is for white to play here. That's stopping knight g4 and bishop g4. And then black can play this move that's a little funny looking at first, but the idea is to get b5 in. And then if white plays here, then black can play knight here with the idea of going here. And an alternative to that, if you don't, because a4 may not be that great a move, is to even play this first. Because a knight on c7 will both stop e5 because it adds pressure here, but it also supports b5. And this is considered fine. So that's what happens on d5. So what white does in this exact position is he usually just takes here. Then the queen a5 move comes in, the one I was just talking about, the one that threatens knight takes e4. And white's best move now is probably to just go ahead and waste a move here and have an indirect attack on the queen. The queen takes, white develops, and now black gets that move in there, trying to get rid of a very good piece here. So he loses the bishop pair, but he gets more control over the dark squares. That knight was controlling these 2 squares. So now black has a queen on these 2 squares, a knight on these 2 squares, and indirectly a bishop on those squares. So that's a big advantage to have. This dark square control makes up for white having the 2 bishops, is the theory. And of course, white's happy to have the 2 bishops, so he will play into this line often. He just may not expect much advantage. Okay, so now white protects that pawn and gets ready to be able to move this pawn either here or here. And black, in fact, often tries to force this move, f3. A little bit of a strange move, but that's what he does sometimes. And then plays this move to get even more dark squares on the king side. It's a determined dark square strategy. White plays here to cover that key square, and black plays here. This is actually all kind of theory. You don't have to play all these moves, but it's kind of a fun line that illustrates all of the themes. White has space, a space advantage, and white has the bishop pair. Black has a little bit of a weakness here. Those would be white's advantages. Black's advantages are beautiful knight there, very strong control of all these dark squares, and no other serious weaknesses. His center is looking quite nice. He has 2-to-1 in the center. So I consider this about equal. White tries to save his bishops usually. That's happened. And black in one game played here and tried to just put a knight here. And white's bishops were quite good. He actually got a small advantage. But I noticed that here, black can play this move, and it's very hard to defend that pawn smoothly. He can't play b3 because of queen takes, so he probably has to play bishop b3, and then there goes the bishop pair. I don't think he would even take that yet. The line I looked at is here because it means f5 might be coming. And for example, just a sample line is here, here, and if f4, that's another good point of king h8, is it's going to open up the g file after white gets f4 in. And here, whoops, yeah, that's good. And I think black's fine here. May not be better, but he's fine. This bishop is really isn't doing what he wants to be doing there. So that's one of the ideas. And the king's a little bit exposed, and black's got nice control. All right, so that's a long answer, but I thought I'd do one of these every week, one of these little bit extended answers about some of these openings rather than, I think in the first weeks I went back and I looked, and sometimes I did actually 18 different types of answers to different positions, and here we're going to slow down a little and let you concentrate on specific ones. The score sheet is slightly bigger, by the way, than it used to be, but it's still not big enough to get a really long analysis. I mean, the moves are bigger. Score sheet's actually shorter, but you can read the moves more easily, which was a complaint I got last week. Okay, so let's go back, I guess all the way back, and let's see what people have said here. We have a, oh yeah, okay, so Sumo says who asked about the books, says he wants to play the Guimard against the Tarrasch. So we talked about that. And I got some other French dangerous weapons questions. That's that book I just mentioned, French Dangerous Weapons. It has the Guimard and also has a bunch of other eccentric variations in it. So here's one question. In your French Dangerous Weapon book, you have a chapter on this. I think we actually had this question before, but it was in the show that got messed up by interference, so people couldn't see or hear the answers. So this is this variation, very strange little move. And I talked about the ideas behind this variation, which have to do with covering this square to some extent against bishop g5 and knight g5. It's also a sort of a high-class waiting move, trying to see what white's going to do. And I have seen some games for this recently. There's one thing that worries me about this line. Now remember, there's the h6 line in the Tarrasch, which we looked at a little bit more. And this I still think is doing quite well. There are recent games with some really top players in this variation. I see a little problem with this move. Even though people have played it, some pretty good players have played it, I'm wondering about this move. I think this move is a little stronger than it was at the time I wrote my book. It gives more problems than I realized. Now, maybe you should just pin this knight here. It's possible. Or even go into this variation, which is not super friendly, but it's certainly possible to play for black. Because I'm seeing problems, maybe just a small disadvantage, but sort of a definite disadvantage after the move I recommended most, which is this. It's also the move people play most. And after white defends that, black plays this move knight here, trying to get rid of this bishop. And if the bishop retreats, black plays here. It's actually very nice, because after that, black plays here, and white can't take it because he can't make the move knight g5. So black is actually even threatening queen takes d4, and everything's falling apart for white because of the famous fork here. Whoops, knight c2. So this looks all great for black, but it turns out white can play this very tricky move that seems to me gives him a little advantage, which is to play check. That's a good move. Now the main line would be going here, and now coming back to that square. And the difference is that after moves like this, it's a little hard to see. You have to compare it with the other line. White plays a3, and whether black takes this or not, black can't move the knight back to c6, where it's very well placed, for example, to cover this outpost. Black has to go to a6. And I think you can imagine that this position with white's center, maybe white's a little better. It's not that much better. You can still play for the move c5, but not really happy. I think white has some advantage here. So if you're going to play this move h6 after knight c3, it's okay after knight d2, but after, you might want to look into this bishop d3 move and try to prepare something for that you're comfortable with. So that would be the answer to that. What else? It says you also discussed the thing we just talked about, which is this, and h6. Do you think this is this? Oh, and then you said, what about a6? Which I also discussed in my book. I put this also in French Dangerous Weapons. French Dangerous Weapons was try to show irregular lines or strange lines or rare lines against the French. Not that the Guimard is that rare anymore, but most of these other lines are. And I talked about this too, and he said, is this as sound as 3h6? I know you have a chapter on both of these in Dangerous Weapons. I actually prefer h6, but I think a6 is very interesting. In fact, I looked up all these recent games and what's been going on in correspondence chess. Now, the usual idea with a6 is actually a very common move in this form, which is this kind of thing. That's a very common way to play with a6. It's well known, and white sort of doing okay in this, but black's doing okay, but black is quite a ways behind in development. So most people are fairly happy with this. Most Tarrasch players who play knight d2 are pretty happy with this for white, although it's certainly there are good players that play black. But my idea in the book was to play this move, and after that come back and then play it like a so-called universal system in the Tarrasch. This is very much like the 3-knight F6 system. The only difference is you have this extra move, but he's been committed to playing this move instead of this move. So I was delighted to find that some very top players have played this position. Topalov, who's 2,800 almost, and Michael Gurevich, who's a big French expert, have played this position. And they play this G5 idea, which is very common now in the knight F6 Tarrasch, but with A6 in, so it's sort of a hybrid system. And I'm not sure how good it is or how bad it is, but it's fun and interesting. So the idea of playing this, and that is in fact what I put in the book. I put quite a bit of material on this, but I guess deep down maybe I didn't really trust it that much. But some good players have played it. Actually, they take first. I don't remember whether I take first or just play G5 first. But the other thing I put in my book is this move, and I think that's really interesting because it simply attacks on the queen side, and it also gives the queen a nice place to go. Queen B6 is played normally, but it's better when it's sort of shielded by these pawns. And of course, you might develop quickly. You might play F6 and castle queen side. It's a fun line. You can check in my book what's going on there. It turns out that's been played by Kamsky since the book came out, so that was kind of fun to know. And Sakayev, who's a great player, have played B5. So I thought it was kind of fun to see that the line is still alive, that A6 is still alive in this form. So just to make that clear, A6 is played quite a bit, but it's played with the idea of playing C5 next. And then white usually starts taking things in one order or another. Certainly this pawn they tend to take. Or they play very slowly and just leave their pieces here. But I should show you that if they do that, because it could come up in our line too, I think we can transpose to our line sometimes by playing this way. In this position, A6 is actually quite useful. This is an absolutely standard position for black and for white. But the move A6 is in, and you might say, oh, maybe that's a waste of time. But in fact, that's very useful because there are a lot of B5 lines that can come up. And A6 is useful anyway, covering queenside squares. So that's worth knowing. Okay, enough for that question. Now, I don't seem to have a lot of people on chat today. So maybe I'll slow down and see if anybody else has said anything. Okay, I'm looking for some chat, either questions or comments. Either that or I haven't scrolled down properly. But I don't think we're getting much here in the way of comments. So maybe I'll just keep discussing various questions that have come to me. Okay, in the French dangerous weapons, there was one more question from the same person. And it has to do with this line. Now this can come up in two different move orders. So I might as well finish off these French questions, and next week we'll do questions in other openings. We've got plenty of those actually. This is a very bizarre move, but of course it's kind of a bizarre book. It's about strange moves here. And Petrosian played the next move. Not that many people have played it, and it looks absolutely ridiculous, but it's not bad. You sort of provoke the move, E5, and then instead of playing, let's just show you something. This is a common move, and then this, or C5 first. So black's given up his dark squared bishop, but in return he wants to attack the center, and he's provoked the move E5, which he actually likes having provoked because he's going to attack it. Now you go back and use the same reasoning, and what Petrosian said is, no, I'll just go back voluntarily. I won't even wait for the attack here. I'll just go all the way back. And I'll attack the center, but I'll keep my bishops, and I'll keep my dark squares protected. It's an incredible idea, almost a ridiculous idea, because you fall so far behind in development. But I do give a couple chapters, I give one chapter on this in my book and a whole bunch of analysis. Now, Petrosian kind of liked this idea of playing sometimes very tightly on the queen's side with this kind of move here, and knight up, and actually castle queen side, and then attack the center. But you can also play this very conventionally. For example, if white plays, oh, I don't know, this move or something, you can just attack like that, just normal moves like this. And the difference between this and some Frenches that you'll be used to is usually this bishop is gone by now. And you're playing this kind of move, this kind of attack on the center. So black has a huge advantage of having kept that bishop. On the other hand, a huge disadvantage of having lost 2 whole tempi. So it's a very interesting system. Now let me show you how else this can happen. This can also happen with another move order, which is again knight c3. And then after knight here, very famous move, and white often plays this move, and black plays here, and white maybe plays here, for example. White has other moves too, and then plays here and goes there, and black is counterattacking with, well, let me just show you a couple moves. Black is counterattacking with this kind of thing, attacking the center. The only problem with black's position, the main problem with black's position, because it's really nice to attack the d4 square when there's no c3 to defend it, is that this knight is kind of cramped on. It's not producing much forward pressure on the center on d7. It's also getting in the way of that bishop on c8. So this is a famous line. It's perfectly good. It's called the Steinitz variation of the classical. And it's fine, but it does have that one disadvantage of the knight being on d7. So one way to solve that is to put the knight on g8. A complete waste of time. But guess what? This is the exact position we just saw with bishop b4, e5, bishop f8. It's just he's bothered to move another piece twice and go back to the last rank. So it's kind of cute. So there's 2 ways to get this position if you want to, if you want to use it. At least you'll be aware there's a couple ways of doing this. And as I say, the idea is you waste all this time, which is terrible, but at least you get a counterattack in the center and you haven't given up the 2 bishops. So in other words, black likes playing against, most French players like playing against d4 and e5. It's a way of provoking that center, like as in the advanced variation, without making the concession of losing your bishop or of having the knight go to a sort of oddball square. So, and in the case of the knight, in the case of the one we just looked at, this one, it doesn't even lose time to play knight g8 because after all you've played 2 moves anyway if you go to d7. So it's not a question of losing time as much as where do you want your knight. And I should say, by the way, where's that knight going? Well, that knight has a lot of prospects of going either here and here to that nice sort of support point square, or here and here, or sometimes h6 and then f6 and knight f7. Knight's pretty well placed on g8. It's just that it took some tempi to get there, and it does stop you from castling quickly. You have to be a French defense player to really enjoy this idea, because it's sort of counterintuitive, especially to the lower player, because it's losing time for development and you're not getting castled. Okay. Now we don't have any more comments yet. I wanted to cover something. I just realized that I skipped something. Let me just see what I was going to tell you. I skipped a comment on one of the earlier questions that I really shouldn't have done. And let me just see here for a second. Okay, it was that early question. Was it about the Guimard? Give me 1 second. I just noticed on the sheet that I missed something and now I can't find it. Maybe it's not that important. Maybe I'll just get back to that. Does anybody want to make any chats? Oh, we got a chat here. Shoot. Well, I'll get it next week. I left out a detail that I really should have put in, but it's a little complicated without looking at it. All right, we have a question here. What is the line where e4, c5 Sicilian and they play c3? That's called the Alapin Sicilian. I think most people listening to the show will probably be pretty familiar with it. And let me just show you that. That's in the, okay, here's the Sicilian defense, 1 c5. And of course the open Sicilian goes like this, and then no matter what black plays here, even, well, maybe not a6, but white's going to play d4. So for example, knight c6, d4. That's called the open Sicilian, because you're opening up the d file, you're opening up lines basically, playing very aggressively. The c3 or Alapin Sicilian, sometimes it's just called the c3 Sicilian, is that move. And And everybody who plays the Sicilian, which is a lot of you, has to know something about this. And there are many ways to answer this. Let me just quickly review a few of the ways to answer that. The two traditional moves that are the most common, but not necessarily the best, are knight here, attacking this pawn, and then white can play slowly here, but usually he's not going to play a move like d3. He's going to attack that knight. The knight goes here. So what's happened here? White's been provoked to making what's possibly a weakness, but he's lost time. And this knight also might still be exposed in the center. And just to show you what some of the main lines are, oh gee, I mean there's so many. But one thing you can do, for example, is simply play like this, and after black takes it, you can attack that knight. And then it turns out white has to be very careful about losing more time by taking that pawn. That's one of many ways to play. Let me think what else is common these days. Yeah, sometimes white will actually play this straight away. We'll play this move right away. Sometimes they'll play d4 before knight f3. And black can also defend that way in the center. That's a standard way to defend. Anyway, there's countless old main lines with knight d5. And obviously I shouldn't go into much detail here. Another way to attack the center, same thing, attack the fact that that's not protected, to try to exploit the fact, is to play this move. And just gain space, open the d file. And the idea is that if white takes there, black's got one advantage that he doesn't normally have with his queen out there, which is the pawns on c3. And so knight c3, which is the way to attack the queen with tempo, as you probably know, is not available. So the queen actually can claim that it's reasonably well placed out there on d5. But white, of course, has a nice position, the usual move. Now there's a bunch of moves here. You can play things like knight c6 and then take an e5, but the normal move, the traditional move is this. White defends that. And then black can play, for example, here. You can also play knight c6. You can also even play e6. That's a sort of traditional move. Very, very cool and calm. The idea is you're going to make an isolated pawn and just develop your pieces in castle. White has tricky moves like this with the idea of either here or here, for example. But probably the most critical move and the most common traditional move is this move, trying to double these pawns. And this gets very complicated. There's even a nice move here that bothered people for a long time, so that even though white has some weak pawns here, it turns out he has reasonable chances in this ending. It's a little difficult for black to defend this. It's not really an ending, it's a queenless middle game. But the more normal move would be here. And at some point, black is going to probably take this, or white's going to probably try and force him to take it. I mean, just for example, something like this, try to force black to take that so that he can get the c3 square for the knight and with tempo against the queen. But in the meantime, this bishop is fairly passively placed, and black can claim that he's happy in positions like this. There's also the move bishop b4, by the way, as a common move. So this is your standard sort of position. White has an isolated pawn. That happens a lot in the c3 Sicilian. But but he has attacking chances because he has space. Having a pawn on d4 versus a pawn on e6 is in and of itself an advantage. So, but black has the advantage that he can attack what might be a weak pawn on an open file on d4. Okay, so that's a little superficial maybe. In fact, maybe we should look at what else you can do against c3 real quickly. Some people play b6. There's a whole book on this, trying to counterattack that way. Not a very popular move. G6 has been played. One of the ideas of G6 is you wait for white to play there, take over the center, which is the idea of c3, of course. And then black plays here, and it looks like he's losing time, and white just is much better. But in fact, black's idea is not to take with the queen, but to take with the knight. And once again, he's got a blockade square in front of an isolated pawn. White, of course, has many ideas too. And, well, there are other ideas. There are tricky things like queen here, so that when white plays here with his big center, he doesn't get a big center because this pawn is pinned. That's a clever little idea. Still played quite a bit, queen a5, actually. There's this move, just playing kind of solidly, then counterattacking here, and then you fianchetto. So you give up the center, but you get good counterplay against the center. That's something grandmasters play because they want to keep the pieces on the board and just have an unbalanced game. And what else have I missed? Well, there's e5. Those are the main moves, I think. I don't think I've missed anything really big there. Okay, what's the best defense against the Grob attack? We may have even talked about this in one of the very early shows. The Grob attack is this. People love asking about irregular openings. And the idea is to get Finch out really quickly, but of course it creates a huge weakness. It's one of the weakest moves, first moves in chess. I think there's only a couple. Usually white can play almost anything because after all he's a move ahead. But this one weakens the king side, and it's going to be hard to get castled after this. It even allows moves like that, for example, just immediately attacking on the king side. The main move that I like, there's a bunch of different moves. One move that I think is actually easy to underrate is playing this right now, because that square is covered by the queen. And if you take, then there are moves like, well, there's even things like queen h4 can happen pretty quickly, or just knight here, and then white has weaknesses. So that's one way to play it. It's obviously not that simple. White has a lot of options, so does black. The way that I always give in my books, the Taming the Wild Chess Openings, which just came out last year, and also all my earlier irregular opening books and opening books, is this move, because this is attacked. And white's, well, that's an awfully slow move and creates a lot of weaknesses. This is a very simple position for black to play because he owns the center and white has weaknesses. So what white, the original idea of the Grob, or one of the big ideas, was to just attack, give up this pawn, and then counterattack this way. The idea being that if black takes, white can take this, and the rook's trapped in the corner. And the problem is, it just turns out that a couple things. One is you can make this very simple move still attacking this. And if he goes there, guess what? We're in that position we just talked about. I played a master who played g4 almost every game for a couple of years. A real strong player, but he handicapped himself playing g4, and I won a couple games against him. He played this move here, after which you can either take or advance. They're both good for black. Probably the best way for white to play it, though. He needs some presence in the center. But I won both those games. And he's probably as good as I was, so. But he really hurt himself by playing this opening. So that's the Grob. And what else was I going to say about that? In this line, I thought I was going to add something here. Oh, you don't have to play c6. You can also just take this. And after that, you can play, for example, let me see if I can get this right. Which is the move I liked most here? Now, if he plays here now, that's actually a good example. Here takes, and queen here seems to put a lot of pressure on these kinds of squares. But it turns out that black can simply give up one of these pawns, and one of the ones he can give up is this. At first sight, it looks like white's got his pieces out and he can't stand that badly, but what happens is black plays like this, brings a knight out, castles, and has two center pawns to none. Can play moves like rook b8, knight c5, all kinds of good stuff. One example might be here, and it looks like white's getting this knight b5 threat in, but you just ignore it. You just play rook c8, and it turns out if he takes that way, he gets in trouble. And if he takes what else can he do? Oh, with this move, then he's losing time that way. Way too far behind in development. So that's a fairly simple way to answer the Grob attack. Pretty easy way to do that. Okay, so going back. Good question. It's always good to see what to do. You know, learning what to do against crazy moves is just incredibly valuable, because most of the time when you're playing over Grandmaster games and looking at beginners books and looking at even more advanced books, they just show very respectable moves for both sides, and you don't know what to do against strange moves because you've never really had that experience. It's very good to know what to do against irregular moves like this, which I think we talked about before, or might have talked about, or this, or what else is strange? Well, that's very strange. Even the birds, which is a respectable opening, but you can learn a lot trying to figure out why is it that more people don't play these moves, because it's not at all obvious in chess why people don't play certain first moves. That I think I mentioned before. In fact, I was going to go into some detail about this. I think I talked about this quite a bit in one of the shows that was covered up with a lot of interference. So it'd be fun to return to this. There's a whole huge 350-page book with dense type about this move. It's a perfectly legitimate move, and it's actually a lot of fun. But there are reasons that people don't play it. Not that black gets the better game, but just that there are some ways in which black controls the pace, and white doesn't want that. But this is a fascinating move. Oh, we're just about out of time. We're almost completely out of time here. Let me let me talk about knight c3 briefly, and we'll just finish off the show that way. Oh wait, we have another chat. I wonder if we can get through this quickly. It's a question I don't know the answer to exactly. I have 2 books on this, but I don't know what the answer is. This is a Sicilian defense. There was a point of time, there's also a DVD about this. There was a point of time where this move, this is an open Sicilian, where this move was very popular, extremely popular. The idea of in both this position and a bunch of other Sicilians where maybe it's a little more respectable, is that if the knight retreats, then even if the queen has to retreat later, the knight might even want to come back. The knight really wants to belong on d4, so it doesn't want to lose time retreating. That's sort of the idea. Now, of course, queen b6 also has a disadvantage that it brings the queen out too early. And once the knight does retreat, for example, or something else happens, the queen can lose time to various moves. So there is a disadvantage to having the queen on b6, but it seems to gain time. So for quite a while, people were playing this. I think in this position, you probably have to play knight b3. This doesn't look sound to me, this gambit. And you could play knight b5, but somehow that seems to lose a lot of time, and black should be fairly happy, I think, just developing. But who knows? You'd have to look at the theory of this. I wish I could answer this better. He says, is it good for black? My impression is it's not that good for black, or a lot more people would play it. That's just my guess. You just don't see it very often. And I'm trying to think that you get to a position like this, and maybe white goes here. Now, black has to figure out which system he wants to play. Does he want to play e6, d6? g6 is probably not very good here. You're just losing too much time. So maybe e6. And so you might get a position sort of like this. And I don't think knight b5 means anything. The queen just sneaks back there. So maybe white develops and black develops. And it's sort of like a timing off Sicilian. And you just have to decide, is the knight there good or bad? Oh, I remember one problem with these lines sometimes is that you get this a5 move in. The knight on b3 supports the a5 move. But to FIDE Master ask this question, I think I have to say I simply don't know. But I'm guessing that there are good systems for white. Otherwise, you'd see it a lot more often. Because it's a well-known line. It was very popular about 10, 15 years ago, maybe even 15, 20 years ago. And there's a DVD on it, and there was a whole book on queen b6 systems, and I'm trying to think who wrote it. The DVD was by Amador Rodriguez, and the book, there might have been more than one book, was by Illich, I think, I-L-I-C. He wrote about a bunch of different queen b6 systems. And somehow it just became less popular, and I really wish I could tell you why. Now, one thing actually that you can't normally do in the Sicilian is play this move because it's just too slow, but here it kind of exploits the fact that the queen shouldn't be there. So I would think that this is another legitimate way to play here. This is another possibility to just play c3. Wouldn't scare me too much, but it might be a small issue. And you know, a knight can come to this square, for example. Maybe this is a bit of a problem. Anyway, time is up. Thanks everybody for listening, all of you who are listening, and I hope to get a little more chat participation next time. And please send me your questions in advance though, because those are the ones that I can really think about and answer, and you can get some free lesson in basically. So ask me questions in advance, and the best one for that is to go to the ICC email, or to my email actually, which is askimwatson@chessclub.com. So that's askimwatson@chessclub, that's one word, CHESSCLUB.com. Send me an email there. You can ask me anything you want, and we'll try to address it on the next show, because I'm getting some really good questions that way. You can also message me to my account, John L. Watson. That's on the screen here, if you'll notice. I think it's written. Oh, no, it's not written on the screen. But you can message me, JOHNLWATSON, and just message. But of course, there are sort of space limitations, so it's hard to ask a good question, and you're live, so you can't really edit while you go along. So a little easier to send the email. and appreciate it. So thank you, everybody, and hopefully I'll see you next. Tell your friends that you've got a free advice column here that anybody can tune into. I think people will learn quite a bit. I'll get better at presenting fun material that is useful for you as time goes on. And so tell your friends about it. Tell people about it. 6 o'clock ICC time on Tuesdays, and tune in and ask questions. Thanks, everybody.